The Harpe Brothers, America's first serial killers in the late 18th century, during the frontier days of early America, a pair of brothers, Micajah Big Harpe and Wiley Little Harpe, carved a bloody path through the wilderness of Kentucky and Tennessee. Their reign of terror was marked by brutality, depravity, and an unprecedented level of violence that shocked even the lawless frontier. Often cited as America's first documented serial killers, the Harpe brothers were known for their horrifying cruelty, murdering men, women, and children indiscriminately in a gruesome spree that lasted years. Their story remains one of the most disturbing tales of early American history, filled with bloodlust, betrayal, and sheer horror. The Harpe brothers' early life. Micajah, Big, and Wiley, Little, Harpe were born in North Carolina to Scottish immigrant parents. Little is known about their early years, but by the time of the American Revolution, the Harpe brothers had already begun developing a reputation for violence. During the war, they sided with British loyalists, not out of loyalty to the crown but because it gave them the opportunity to engage in plundering and violence. As the war ended and the frontier began expanding, the Harpes took their taste for blood into the lawless wilderness of Kentucky and Tennessee. They started as river pirates, robbing and killing travelers along the waterways. But what set the Harpe brothers apart from ordinary criminals was their wanton disregard for human life, and the sheer brutality of their murders. A reign of terror unlike other outlaws of the time, who typically killed for profit or out of necessity, the Harpe brothers killed for pleasure. Their crimes often included mutilation, dismemberment, and extreme cruelty, far beyond what was necessary to rob or escape capture. They killed travelers, farmers, and even entire families, leaving behind a trail of blood that terrified those living on the frontier. One of their earliest known murders occurred when they killed a man named Johnson, who had invited them into his cabin for a meal. After eating, the Harpes killed Johnson in cold blood, for no apparent reason. This was followed by a spree of random killings, where they targeted anyone they encountered, whether on the road or in their homes. Their methods were grotesque. The Harpes would often mutilate their victims, cutting them into pieces and disposing of the bodies in rivers or shallow graves. In some cases, they crushed their victims' heads with rocks or hammers, or slit their throats and left the bodies as a warning to others. One particularly horrifying method of execution involved gutting their victims and filling their bodies with stones before dumping them into rivers, ensuring they would sink and never be found. No discrimination in victims. The Harpe brothers were notorious for murdering not only adult men but also women and children. In one particularly horrifying case, the brothers killed a family they had been staying with, including a baby, whom they bashed against a tree. They killed indiscriminately, without concern for age or gender. Their pleasure was derived from the act of killing itself. Travelers on the frontier would often go missing, and when bodies were found, they were usually mutilated in ways that were instantly recognizable as the work of the Harpe brothers. The killings spread fear across the region, with settlers terrified to travel or even leave their homes. Betrayal and capture. Despite their brutal methods, the Harpes managed to evade capture for years, terrorizing the frontier. They frequently used the chaotic, lawless environment of the frontier to their advantage, slipping across state lines to escape justice. At one point, they joined a gang of river pirates, but even among criminals, the Harpes' cruelty was too much. They were eventually betrayed by one of their own gang members, who turned them over to authorities in Kentucky. In 1799, the Harpe brothers were finally captured and held for trial, but they managed to escape before they could be brought to justice. They resumed their killing spree almost immediately after their escape, leaving behind more bodies and chaos in their wake. Their most notorious murder after their escape involved the brutal killing of a young boy. The boy was the son of a man who had taken the Harpes in, providing them with shelter. The brothers, in their usual fashion, repaid this kindness by murdering the boy and fleeing once again. The end of Big Harpe. The Harpe brothers' reign of terror finally came to an end in August 1799, when they were tracked down by a posse led by Moses Stegall, whose wife and infant child had been brutally murdered by the Harpes. Seeking revenge, Stegall and the posse confronted Big Harpe in the woods. During the confrontation, Big Harpe was shot and fatally wounded. As he lay dying, Stegall approached him and, in an act of revenge for the murder of his family, cut off Harpe's head with a knife. Stegall took the severed head and displayed it on a stake at a crossroads near Henderson, Kentucky, as a warning to others. Little Harpe's capture. Little Harpe managed to escape and continued his life of crime. He eventually joined the notorious river pirate Samuel Mason, but his luck ran out when he was captured by authorities. To avoid execution, Little Harpe betrayed Mason by turning in his head as proof of his capture, hoping to receive a pardon. However, the authorities recognized Little Harpe for who he was and executed him by hanging in 1804. His brutal death marked the end of the Harpe brothers' bloody legacy. A legacy of fear. The Harpe brothers are considered by many to be America's first documented serial killers, and their crimes remain some of the most horrific in early American history. Their wanton violence, disregard for human life, and sadistic pleasure in killing make them stand out among even the most notorious criminals of the time. The trail of blood they left across Kentucky and Tennessee instilled fear in frontier settlers, and their legacy of terror lived on in local folklore long after their deaths. The Harpe brothers were more than mere outlaws. They were cold-blooded killers who reveled in the suffering of others, setting a dark precedent for the serial killers who would come after them. This true story of the Harpe brothers is one of the most disturbing and brutal chapters of early American history, involving sadistic violence, mutilation, and murder. Their crimes shocked the lawless frontier, and their legacy remains a haunting reminder of the depths of human cruelty.